The Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah or Supporters of God, are an armed group that controls most parts of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a and some of the western and northern areas close to Saudi Arabia. The Houthis emerged in the 1990s but rose to prominence in 2014 when the group rebelled against Yemen's government, causing it to step down and sparking a crippling humanitarian crisis. Houthis in Yemen withstood nearly a decade of crushing airstrikes and a suffocating blockade from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and are now squaring off with Israel and more recently a global coalition led by the US. How has a rebel group based in an impoverished country with very little outside support managed to not only retain domestic control in Yemen, but exercise power and influence throughout the region? Let's explore the effect and background of the Houthi attack on global trade. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Attacks by Yemeni Houthi rebels on merchant ships heading for the Suez Canal via the Red Sea are causing one of the biggest disruptions to world trade since the COVID-19 pandemic. At least 18 shipping lines, including Danish giant Maersk, have already rerouted their vessels around South Africa to avoid passing through the strategic Gulf of Aden, an alternative that makes journeys between Asia and Europe significantly longer and more expensive. The impact on freight rates has been astronomical. They've almost tripled since the attacks, which the rebel militia claims are aimed at pushing Israel for the war in Gaza, intensified in December. The escalating cost of transport threatens the world economy with a further inflationary setback, although experts are confident that the effect will be limited. The increase in the cost of transport comes at a delicate time for the global economic situation, marked by uncertainty and the hangover from an inflationary escalation that was beginning to subside. Various freight booking platforms calculate that carrying goods in a 40-foot container from Asia to Northern Europe now costs $4,000. A 173% increase from December. For cargoes from Asia to the Mediterranean, the price rises to $5,175, and some companies are charging as much as $6,000 on routes due to depart in mid-January. Just mentioning the Houthis when speaking of northern Yemen is a very limited way to look at this conflict. It's not just the Houthis, but a very large component of the Sana'a government is made up by the Saleh regime. These were either forced to join the Houthi movement after the coup or motivated by Saleh's initial alliance with the Houthis. Military-wise, they seem to competently combine both conventional and non-conventional methods of warfare and have procured a very strong arsenal of ballistic missiles and drones from Iran, which they now appear to be successfully producing locally. It also helps a lot that the geography under their control is completely impenetrable, so they can entrench and hold a front line along the mountainous regions. And no, the primary reason isn't that Arab armies are completely incompetent, because they fought quite a very few well-executed battles in Aden, Hodeidah, and to a lesser extent Marib. The fact of the matter is, there is simply no way to successfully penetrate the areas under their control without a complete siege. And this can only be done if you control the ports, mainly Hodeidah. When the coalition armies attempted to take over the port, the Houthis ran a successful media campaign about how that would eventually lead to a humanitarian catastrophe. External pressures led the coalition to halt the battle at a point where they had the momentum and the Sana'a government's capabilities were nowhere close to what it is now. Basically, fully half of the Yemeni army and administration defected to the Houthis, giving them access to a lot of weapons and a solid organization. They were state-like from the get-go and were not a militia that had to build up a state-like infrastructure. Many of these weapons were outdated, but Iranians are expert at low-cost retrofitting and managing to convert a lot of old Yemeni equipment into good enough ballistic missiles that can be spammed to overwhelm defenses. Besides, the Yemeni population is one of the youngest on the planet. They can soak up losses like it's nothing, which is very useful in war. Finally, their cause is quite popular within Yemen, allowing them to have on-post intelligence or enemy movement, which allowed them to deflect offenses or launch beheading strikes. Basically, they're powerful for the same reasons the Vietmen was. Goldman Sachs has reached its recommendation to buy Maersk's shares, which are up 30% in the last month. In the case of Hapag-Lloyd, shares have risen by almost 50% in the same period. Guaranteeing security in the Red Sea area is very complicated. The al-mandab Strait, the main access route to the Red Sea between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, is only 30 kilometers long. so ships have to pass slowly and in a single file, with little room for maneuver. They thus become easy targets for drones launched by the Houthi fighters. In the first days of the year, traffic in the Suez Canal has fallen by 28% compared to the same period in 2023. According to data reports, in other words, 3.1% of world trade is being redirected from the Red Sea to other routes. Transportation costs have a major inflationary impact. The entire globe has a supply chain crisis, with Houthis blocking off the Red Sea, and we're the closest we have been to World War II since the Cuban Missile Crisis. From the POV of the Houthi and Muslims populace, the British and American airstrikes in Yemen since January 12, launched with support from Australia, Canada, and the Netherlands among others, demonstrate yet again how most Western nations value their money and profit much more than human life. Israel's devastating war on Gaza, the first live-streamed genocide in history, has claimed more than 27,000 Palestinian lives, many of them children, since October 7. Most of the Gaza Strip has been reduced to rubble, and over 1 million people have been displaced due to relentless and seemingly indiscriminate Israeli bombardment. In the face of this undeniable humanitarian catastrophe, Western governments took no meaningful action. In fact, both US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak repeatedly made it clear that they will continue to unconditionally support Israel's onslaught on Gaza and efforts to eradicate Hamas, whatever the human cost may be for the Palestinians. In the end, it was not the killing and maiming of tens of thousands of civilians, but a number of non-fatal attacks by Yemen's Houthi fighters on commercial ships passing through the strategically important al-mandab Strait that sprung Western nations into action. Clearly, the dollars and pounds lost to the rapid rise in shipping costs caused by the attacks proved more valuable to the leaders of the free world than rivers of Middle Eastern blood. Analysts say that the Houthis' attacks on Red Sea ships could threaten peace within Yemen, particularly as ceasefire talks after a decade-long war appear to be gathering momentum. The Houthis' strikes have expanded from targets connected to Israel in protest of the siege and bombing of Gaza to ships affiliated with the US and UK in what their group calls acts of self-defense. Helen Lackner is a French writer, resident in the UK, academic and researcher mostly known for her work on the Middle East and Yemen in particular. She is the author, among other books, of Yemen in Crisis, which won the Grand Prix of Literary Association's 2018, has stated, "The Houthis have been extremely explicit and repeat on almost daily basis that their attacks on ships in the Red Sea will stop as soon as the Gaza war ends. The Iranian involvement has become greater, but it's very important to know that the Houthis are an independent movement. The Houthis are not Iranian proxies, they make their own decisions." Almost 30,000 people, the vast majority Palestinian, have been killed since the unprecedented Hamas attacks in southern Israel on October 7, which launched the Israeli assault in Gaza. The Israeli offensive is showing no signs of any let-up, and the death toll is certain to rise on both sides as fighting continues. Political attempts at peace have failed. Israel has stated from the outset that its objective is to eliminate Hamas's military and governing capabilities. To this end, it has continued the aerial bombardment and ground invasion of the Gaza Strip almost without pause since October 7. While Israel admits it has failed in this mission so far, it claims it is just a question of time before it achieves this goal. But does the situation on the ground support that claim? The answer is a cautious no. A detailed and impartial analysis of various aspects of his performance leads to the conclusion that so far, Hamas has experienced more successes than failures.